The road was a ghost, a pale ribbon of dirt cutting through dead fields. And on that road, a ghost of a girl walked. Her name was Olive. She was 18. And her world had ended that morning. Not with a bang, but with the click of a door. Her stepfather had stood there, his face like a block of granite. "There's no room for you here anymore," he'd said. His voice was flat, final. "A grown woman is a burden I won't carry." He'd shoved a bundle into her arms. A spare dress, a hairbrush, her mother's Bible. Then the door had clicked shut. A sound of absolute finality. So she walked. Because stopping meant admitting it was over. That she was nothing. That she was nowhere. The sun was a weak coin in a gray sky, and it was getting cold. A wind, sharp as a razor, sliced through her thin shawl. The cold wasn't just on her skin, it was inside her bones, a deep, creeping chill. No money, no food, no place to sleep. The world was a vast, empty canvas, and she was a tiny, insignificant speck about to be wiped away. Then the rain began. At first, it was a relief. Something to focus on besides the burn behind her eyes. But the relief didn't last. The drops turned into a downpour, a cold, heavy sheet of water that soaked her in seconds. The road turned to mud, grabbing at her shoes, trying to pull her down. She was shivering so hard her teeth rattled in her skull. Desperation was a physical thing, clawing at her throat. She stumbled, head down, and a prayer ripped from her heart. Not a pretty prayer. A raw, silent scream. "Please, God. I have nowhere to go. I'm so cold. Please." She lifted her head and saw it. A light, a single soft golden glow piercing the miserable gray gloom. It was a farmhouse, set back from the road, tucked into a stand of strong oak trees. Smoke curled from its chimney. A promise of warmth. A promise of life. It looked solid. It looked cared for. It looked like a sanctuary. She didn't know then that some sanctuaries are just well-disguised traps. Every step up the muddy path was a battle. What if they turned her away? The thought was a shard of ice in her gut. She stood on the porch, dripping, clutching her bundle like a shield. She took a shaky breath and knocked. The sound was a cannon blast in the quiet evening. Silence. Only the drum of the rain on the roof. Then footsteps. A heavy bolt slid back with a solid thunk. The door creaked open. A rectangle of warm, firelit air spilled out, pushing back the cold. A man stood in the doorway. He was young, maybe early 20s, with a serious face that wasn't unkind. His clothes were simple, the clothes of a man who worked the land. His name was Virgil. His calm, brown eyes widened just a little. He took in her drenched, shivering form, her pale face, the sheer hopelessness clinging to her like a second skin. Olive opened her mouth to explain, but a sob broke free instead. Virgil didn't speak. He didn't ask her name. He just looked at her, and in his gaze, she saw not a stranger, but something else. An understanding that felt old, practiced. He stepped back, pulling the door wider. "Come in," he said, his voice low and gentle. "Come in out of the cold." It wasn't just an invitation. It felt like a command of mercy. As Olive stepped across the threshold, into the warmth and the light, a tiny spark of hope flickered to life. It was the last time for a very long time she would feel anything so simple as hope. The warmth of the kitchen was an assault. It was so sudden, so profound, it made her skin ache. The shivers racking her body began to calm, replaced by a deep, weary trembling. She stood just inside the door, a puddle forming at her feet, terrified of soiling the clean, scrubbed floor. The room was simple, lit by a single oil lamp and the fire in a large stone hearth. It smelled of dried herbs, wood smoke, and soap. It smelled safe. Virgil moved with a quiet purpose, pulling out a chair for her. "Sit," he said. It was direct, but not harsh. She sat, clutching her wet bundle. From a pot near the fire, he ladled a thick, savory stew into a bowl. He set it on the table with a spoon and a slice of dark bread. The smell was so good, it made her head swim. "Eat," he instructed. Then he turned his back, giving her the privacy to devour it. She ate, the warm food a miracle in her empty stomach. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. As she ate, she sensed someone else watching her. A young girl, maybe 9 or 10, stood in a doorway. She had wide, curious eyes and 2 long brown braids, and she was holding a cornhusk doll. She watched Olive with an intensity that was unsettling. There was no childish shyness there. It was something else, a watchfulness. Virgil noticed her. "Maeve," he said softly, "this woman is our guest." The girl, Maeve, didn't smile. She just gave a single solemn nod, then disappeared. A moment later, she returned with a thick woolen blanket. She approached Olive cautiously and held it out. Her large eyes were full of a silent, serious pity that felt older than she was. The simple kindness should have been a comfort. Instead, a tiny alarm bell went off in the back of Olive's mind. It was all too perfect. The warm fire, the food, the solemn little girl with the blanket. It felt rehearsed. Once the bowl was empty, a wave of exhaustion hit her so hard she nearly slumped over in the chair. "You will stay here tonight," Virgil stated. It wasn't a question. "The spare room is small, but it's warm." He lit a candle and led her down a short hallway, Maeve trailing behind them like a silent shadow. He opened a door to a tiny room, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single window looking out into the black, rain-swept night. "You can sleep here," he said. "No one will disturb you." He left the candle and closed the door softly behind him. Alone, Olive peeled off her wet clothes. She slipped under the heavy quilt, the feeling of clean, dry sheets, a forgotten luxury. The candlelight threw strange, dancing shadows on the walls. She could hear the faint murmur of Virgil and Maeve's voices from the other room. They weren't comforting sounds. They were low, serious, and she could not make out the words. She felt safe. She told herself she was safe. But as she drifted off to sleep, holding her mother's Bible, she couldn't shake the feeling that the bolt on her door hadn't been made to keep the cold out. It had been made to keep something in. Sunlight woke her. A bright rectangle on the floor. For a moment she was completely disoriented. Then the memory of the storm, the farmhouse, the serious man and his silent sister rushed back. Her dress was dry but wrinkled. She put it on, her heart thumping with a new anxiety. She couldn't just be a burden. She had to earn her place. She found them in the kitchen. Maeve was eating porridge at the table, her eyes downcast. Virgil stood by the hearth pouring tea. He looked up as she entered, and his face was a blank mask. The gentleness from last night was gone. "Virgil," she began, her voice shaking a little, "I thank you for your kindness. You saved me. But I cannot impose. I have no money, but I am strong. I can cook, clean, mend. I can help with the chores. Or," she glanced at Maeve, "I could help your sister with her lessons. I can read and write." She held her breath, her entire future hanging on his answer. Virgil studied her. His face was unreadable. It was a long, silent moment. He looked from her to Maeve, who was now staring intently at the spoon in her bowl. Finally, he gave a single, slow nod. "The work of a farm is never done," he said, his voice flat. "An extra pair of hands is always needed. You may stay. Help Maeve with her learning, help around the house. It will be a fair trade." The relief was so powerful it almost made her dizzy. She had a place. She had a chance. And so her new life began. A life of quiet rhythms and hard work. She rose before dawn, helped with breakfast, and then, while Virgil worked the fields, She threw herself into the household chores. She swept, scrubbed, and mended with a desperate, grateful energy. She was determined to prove her worth. In the afternoons, she sat with Maeve at the kitchen table. Maeve was a strange student. She was bright, learned quickly, but there was a wall around her. She rarely smiled. She answered questions in a soft, low voice, and her eyes were always darting towards the door, as if expecting to be interrupted. One afternoon, Olive was teaching her a multiplication song. A small, genuine smile finally broke through on Maeve's face. It was like the sun breaking through clouds. Suddenly the back door opened. Virgil stood there. He hadn't made a sound. Maeve's smile vanished instantly. She flinched, her eyes wide with something that looked a lot like fear. She stared down at her slate, her shoulders hunched. Virgil looked from his sister to Olive. His expression was dark. "Time for your outdoor chores, Maeve," he said. His voice was quiet, but it had an edge of steel. Maeve scrambled from her chair and fled without a word. Olive's blood ran cold. It wasn't just the reaction of a child being told to do her chores. It was fear, pure and simple, and the look Virgil gave her. It wasn't the look of a kind protector. It was a look of warning. That night, she lay in her small bed, listening. The house was usually silent after supper, but tonight she heard voices from the main room, Virgil's low rumble, and Maeve's, small and pleading. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. He was angry. She crept from her bed, her heart pounding. She tiptoed down the dark hallway until she was just outside the kitchen door, which was cracked open a sliver. "Told you not to get familiar," Virgil was saying, his voice a harsh whisper. "She is not family. She is a means to an end. You will not forget that again." "But she's kind," Maeve whispered back. "Kindness is a luxury we cannot afford," Virgil snapped. "Now go to your room." Olive scurried back to her bed, her mind reeling. A means to an end? What did that mean? She was not a guest. She was not a helper. She was a tool, a piece in some puzzle she couldn't begin to understand. The farmhouse no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage, and she had walked right into it. The days that followed were filled with a creeping dread. Olive moved through her chores like an automaton, her senses on high alert. The quiet kindness of Virgil now seemed menacing. His steady gaze felt less like compassion and more like surveillance. Every simple conversation was a test, every question a potential trap. She learned to smile, to be helpful, to play the part of the grateful orphan, all while a cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. She tried to talk to Maeve again, to find out what was wrong, but the girl was a fortress. She kept her eyes down, gave one-word answers, and never, ever smiled when Virgil was near. The wall between them was now made of solid ice. Olive realized Virgil hadn't just warned Maeve. He had threatened her. One rainy evening, Virgil announced he had to ride into town for supplies and wouldn't be back until late. This was her chance. Her one chance to find some answers. After he left, a tense silence fell over the house. Maeve sat by the fire with her doll, pretending to play, but her small body was rigid with anxiety. "Maeve," Olive said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to understand. What did he mean? A means to an end?" Maeve's head shot up, her eyes wide with terror. She shook her head violently, clutching her doll tighter. "We're not supposed to talk about it," she breathed. "Talk about what?" Olive pressed, kneeling in front of her. "Please, Maeve. I'm scared." Seeing the genuine fear in Olive's eyes seemed to break something in the little girl. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "The others," she whispered. "The others?" Olive's blood ran cold. "What others?" "The other girls who came," Maeve said, her voice trembling. "They were like you, lost, alone. Virgil, he brought them here to help." "To help with the farm?" Olive asked, though she already knew the answer was wrong. Maeve shook her head. To help with the waiting. He says we have to wait for the master to come back. He says we need to have everything ready. The master? Olive felt a profound confusion. Who is the master? I don't know his name, Maeve whispered, looking towards a heavy locked door at the far end of the main room. A door Olive had never seen opened. But he lives in there. Olive stared at the locked door. It was just a plain wooden door, but now it seemed monstrous, pulsing with a dark energy. He lives in that room? Maeve, that's just a pantry. It's not a pantry, Maeve said, her voice dropping even lower. It's his room. Virgil takes him food every night. He says the master is unwell, and we must not disturb him. This was insane. There was no master. It was a story Virgil had told a little girl to scare her, to control her. It had to be. But what about the other girls? Maeve! Where did the other girls go? Olive asked, her voice tight. Maeve looked down at her doll, her braids falling forward to hide her face. They left, she said, but her voice was hollow, devoid of belief. Virgil said they found new homes, but sometimes at night, I hear digging. A wave of pure terror washed over Olive. Digging. She had to get out. She had to run. Now. But what about Maeve? She couldn't leave this terrified child alone with that man. Her eyes fell back to the locked door. The master. It was a lie. It had to be. But it was the center of this whole twisted web. She had to know what was behind it. The key. Where would he keep the key? Virgil was a man of habit. He hung his coat on a peg by the door. His work keys were always on a nail in the barn. But a special key. She scanned the room. The fireplace mantel. A heavy, ornate Bible sat on it, much older and grander than her own small one. Virgil never read from it. It was just there. For show. Her hands trembling, she walked to the fireplace and picked up the heavy book. It fell open in her hands. The center had been hollowed out, and nestled inside was a large iron key. She looked at Maeve, who was watching her, her face pale in the firelight. Olive put a finger to her lips. She took the key and walked to the forbidden door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. She slid the key into the lock. It was stiff, but it turned with a loud, grating click. She took a deep breath, pulled the door open, and peered into the darkness. It wasn't a pantry. It was a small, windowless room. The air that flowed out was stale and smelled of dust and something else, something sweet and sickly. In the center of the room was a single, large wooden chest. It wasn't a room for a living master. It was a tomb. Olive stared into the dark room, the foul air clinging to the back of her throat. A tomb. That was the only word for it. Her mind reeled. Maeve's story about a master was a lie Virgil had fed her, a boogeyman to ensure her obedience. But what was in the chest? And what had happened to the other girls? Her hand, still holding the key, was slick with sweat. She had to look. She had to know the truth, no matter how horrible. She grabbed the oil lamp from the table, her hand shaking so badly the light danced and swayed. Maeve cowered by the fire, her face buried in her doll. Stay there, Olive whispered, her own voice sounding thin and strange to her ears. She stepped across the threshold, holding the lamp high. The room was bare except for the chest. It was made of dark, heavy wood, bound with iron straps. It was a coffin, not a fancy one, but a simple, grim box for burying the dead. But why was it here? In the house? And why was it locked from the outside? The sickly sweet smell was stronger in here. It was the smell of decay, poorly masked with dried herbs. She remembered the scent of herbs that had filled the kitchen that first night. The smell she had thought was so comforting. Now it was horrifying. She placed the lamp on the floor and approached the chest. There was no lock on it, just a heavy lid. With a grunt of effort, she heaved it open. The lamplight fell inside. It wasn't a body. It was filled with dresses. Simple homespun dresses of various sizes and colors, just like hers. And on top of the pile of clothes was a small collection of personal items. A silver locket, a ribbon for someone's hair, a small carved wooden bird, and several Bibles, just like the one she clutched to her chest every night. These were the things that had belonged to the other girls. The girls who had come before her. The girls who had left. A choked sob escaped her lips. Virgil wasn't just a farmer. He was a monster, a collector. He lured in lost girls, worked them, terrified them, and then... what? When they were no longer useful, he disposed of them and kept a souvenir. The digging Maeve heard at night. It was real. He wasn't waiting for a master. He was the master. She slammed the chest shut, backing away, her mind screaming. She had to get Maeve and run. Run into the rainy night. Run anywhere, just away from this house of horrors. She turned to flee the room and slammed right into a solid wall of muscle. Virgil. He stood in the doorway, blocking the light from the kitchen. His face was a mask of cold fury. He hadn't gone to town at all. It had been a test, a trap, and she had walked right into it. "I see you found our little hope chest," he said, his voice a low, terrifying calm. Olive scrambled backward, tripping and falling to the floor of the grim little room. "Stay away from me," she gasped. "Now, why would I do that?" he said, taking a slow step inside. He reached out and closed the door to the kitchen, plunging the small room into the flickering, hellish light of the single lamp on the floor. "You were so perfect, so obedient, so grateful. I truly thought you were the one." "The one for what?" she cried, pressing herself against the far wall. "The one who would understand," he said, his eyes glittering in the gloom. "The one who would appreciate the order of things. The one who would help me keep Maeve safe." His words made no sense. "Safe? You terrorize her. You've built her a prison of lies." "Lies are what keep her alive," he roared, his calm facade shattering. He took another step closer, his large frame seeming to suck all the air out of the room. "You have no idea what's out there. No idea the evil that walks in this world. I protect her from it. I protect this farm from it." "You're the evil," she shrieked. "You kill innocent girls." Virgil stopped. A look of genuine confusion crossed his face. "Kill them? I have never harmed a single one of them. I gave them shelter. I gave them purpose. And when the time was right, I sent them on their way with a new dress and money for the stagecoach." Olive stared at him, her terror momentarily replaced by disbelief. "You're lying. Maeve heard digging." "I was digging a new root cellar," he said, his voice softening slightly. "The work is hard and best done at night when it's cool. The girls leave, Olive. They always leave, just like my mother did." "Just like everyone does." His eyes were filled with a strange, deep pain. He wasn't a monster. He was something else. Something broken. "They leave their old lives behind," he continued, gesturing to the chest. "Their old burdens. I keep them here to remember them, to honor their journey." He looked down at her, his expression pleading. "I thought you would be different. I thought, because of your faith, you would choose to stay, that you would choose us." He was mad. Not a killer, perhaps, but insane. Trapped in some delusion built from his own loneliness and fear. But the immediate threat had changed. He wasn't going to kill her. He was going to try and make her stay. Forever. "The only thing I choose is to leave this place," Olive said, finding a sliver of courage. "And I'm taking Maeve with me." Virgil's face hardened again. "No, no one else is leaving me. Maeve is my blood, and you are my hope. You will stay. You will learn the rules. You will be part of this family." He reached for her. At that exact moment, there was a loud, frantic banging on the main farmhouse door. A man's voice roared from outside, a voice that turned Olive's blood to ice. "I know she's in there. I've tracked the little stray all the way to this hovel. Send her out or I'll burn this place to the ground." It was her stepfather, and the raw, violent rage in his voice made one thing terrifyingly clear. Virgil wasn't the evil she needed to fear. The true monster was standing on the porch. The sound of her stepfather's voice shattered the tense air in the small, dark room. Virgil froze, his hand still outstretched towards Olive. His head snapped toward the sound, and the look on his face was not one of surprise. It was a look of grim, terrible recognition. "He found us," Virgil whispered, and all the madness seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. "You know him?" Olive stammered, scrambling to her feet. "I know his kind," Virgil said, his eyes dark with old memories. He turned and looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time she saw the man behind the delusion. She saw a terrified brother who had been running his whole life. "The fever that took my parents. It wasn't a sickness, Olive. It was a man just like that one. He came wanting money, food, whatever he could take. My father stood up to him. And he—" Virgil's voice broke. "He left us orphans in a burning house. I saved Maeve. I've been saving her ever since." Everything clicked into place. The isolation, the fear of strangers, the obsessive need for control. He hadn't been building a prison to keep Olive in. He had been maintaining one to keep the world out. The master wasn't in the room. The master was the memory of that evil, a ghost he honored with fear and vigilance. The other girls weren't victims. They were temporary reinforcements in his lonely watch. "I will not let him take this house," Virgil said, his voice hardening into steel. "I will not let him touch my sister." He looked at Olive. "Or you." Outside, her stepfather bellowed again. "I see your light. Open this door." A heavy thud shook the entire farmhouse as he threw his shoulder against the door. Virgil moved with sudden, sharp purpose. He strode out of the small room, leaving the door open. Olive followed him, her heart hammering. Maeve was still huddled by the fire, white with terror. "Maeve," Virgil commanded, his voice sharp but no longer cruel. It was the voice of a soldier. "Go to your room. Bar the door. Do not come out, no matter what you hear." Maeve, accustomed to his commands, scrambled off and did as she was told. Another crash against the door, louder this time. The wood groaned. "He's going to break it down," Olive said, her voice trembling. "I know," Virgil said. He walked to the stone hearth and reached up, pulling a long, heavy Kentucky rifle down from its hooks on the wall. He worked the action with practiced ease, his movements fluid and certain. He was no longer a quiet, strange farmer. He was a man defending his home. "He's not after your farm, Virgil," Olive said, the horrible truth dawning on her. "He's after me." Her stepfather hadn't just cast her out. He had hunted her. Why? The house was his. What could he possibly want from her? Unless the house wasn't his. Her mother. On her deathbed she had been so weak, her words a faint whisper. She'd clutched Olive's hand. "The house. It's yours, my girl. The deed is safe." Olive had thought it was just the fever talking. But what if it wasn't? What if the deed to the farm, her home, was in her name? Her stepfather hadn't just thrown her out to be rid of a burden. He'd thrown her out to steal her inheritance. And now, he'd come to silence the only person who could challenge his claim. He wasn't just a cruel man. He was a thief and a would-be murderer. Crack! A loud splintering sound came from the door. A jagged hole appeared, and the bolt began to bend. Virgil raised the rifle to his shoulder, aiming it squarely at the door. He was calm. Utterly calm. "Stay behind me," he said to Olive without looking away from his target. Olive backed away, her eyes wide. She looked around the simple kitchen that had been her prison and now might become her tomb. She saw the heavy iron skillet she used to make their breakfast every morning. It was sitting on the cold stovetop. Without a second thought, she grabbed it. It was heavy, solid in her hands. She wouldn't just hide, she wouldn't be a victim, not anymore. With a final shattering roar, the door flew open. Her stepfather stood there, silhouetted against the stormy night. He was bigger than she remembered, his face twisted into a mask of pure greed and rage. He saw Virgil with the rifle, and he laughed, a nasty, sharp sound. "You think that toy will stop me, boy? I've come for what's mine." His eyes locked on Olive. "You should have just kept walking, girl. Would have saved us all this trouble." He took a step inside. "That's far enough," Virgil said, his voice ringing with authority. The stepfather laughed again and lunged forward. The rifle exploded with a deafening blast. The flash lit up the room, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Her stepfather cried out, not in pain, but in rage. The shot had gone wide, hitting the doorframe beside him. Virgil hadn't been trying to kill him. He'd been trying to warn him. It was a mistake. The man was on Virgil in a second, grabbing the barrel of the rifle. He was stronger, heavier, and fueled by a vicious rage. They struggled, crashing into the table, sending the lamp tumbling to the floor. The flames sputtered and died, plunging the room into near-total darkness, lit only by the faint, dying glow from the fireplace. Olive could hear the sounds of the struggle. Grunts, curses, the thud of bodies hitting the floor. She held the iron skillet with both hands, her knuckles white. She was terrified, but a cold, clear purpose cut through the fear. She heard a sickening crack, and Virgil cried out in pain. Then a heavy thud. Silence. "Now, girl," her stepfather's voice rasped from the darkness. "It's just you and me." She could hear him moving, stalking her in the dark. She held her breath, pressing herself against the wall, the iron skillet raised high. The embers in the hearth cast just enough light for her to see his hulking shape separate from the shadows near the floor where Virgil lay motionless. He was coming for her. The lost girl on the road was gone. The frightened guest was gone. The prisoner was gone. All that was left was a woman with nothing left to lose. He took another step, and she swung. She swung the heavy iron skillet with all the strength of her fear and her rage. It connected with the side of her stepfather's head with a sickening, hollow thunk. He grunted, stumbling sideways, more surprised than hurt. He wasn't expecting her to fight back. He reached out in the dark, grabbing a handful of her dress and pulled her off her feet. She fell hard, the skillet clattering away across the wooden floor. He was on top of her in an instant, his weight crushing her, his hands closing around her throat. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot and foul. "Stupid girl," he hissed, his thumbs pressing into her windpipe. Black spots danced in her vision. The room was spinning. She clawed at his hands, but he was too strong. She was going to die. Here, on this floor, at the hands of this monster. Then, from the darkness behind him, a small shape emerged. Maeve. She hadn't stayed in her room. In her hands, she held the heavy, hollowed-out family Bible, the one that had hidden the key. With a silent, desperate sob, she raised the heavy book high over her head and brought it down with all her might on the back of the man's skull. The blow wasn't strong enough to disable him, but it was enough. He roared in pain and surprise, his grip on Olive's throat loosening for just a second. It was the only second she needed. She sucked in a ragged gasp of air and writhed, twisting her body and driving her knee up into his groin as hard as she could. He howled, a high, thin sound of agony, and rolled off her, clutching himself. Olive scrambled away, gasping for air, her throat raw. She saw Virgil beginning to stir on the floor, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. The rifle lay nearby. Her stepfather was already pushing himself up, his face a mask of unbelievable fury. He turned on Maeve. "You little rat!" he snarled, and lunged for her. "No!" Olive screamed. She grabbed the rifle. She didn't know how to load it, how to aim it properly. She just knew she had to stop him. She got her feet under her, holding the heavy weapon like a club. But she wasn't fast enough. He grabbed Maeve by one of her long braids, yanking her back. The little girl cried out in pain. At that moment, Virgil, propped up on his one good arm, let out a guttural yell. He had crawled to the fireplace, and his hand had closed around the heavy iron poker. With a surge of adrenaline, he threw it. The poker spun end over end through the air and struck Olive's stepfather squarely in the back of the knee. His leg buckled, and he went down with a crash, losing his grip on Maeve. He fell right at Olive's feet. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He saw the rifle in her hands, and for the first time, he looked afraid. Olive didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She just acted. She reversed the rifle, gripping the barrel, and swung the heavy wooden stock like an axe, putting every ounce of her being into the blow. It struck him squarely on the temple. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed, unconscious. Silence descended on the room, broken only by their ragged, desperate breaths. Olive stood over the fallen man, the rifle still in her hands, shaking uncontrollably. Maeve ran to her, wrapping her arms around her legs, sobbing. Virgil slowly, painfully, pulled himself into a sitting position, cradling his broken arm. They had survived. They were battered, terrified, and bleeding, but they were alive. The three of them, this strange, broken little family, huddled together in the ruins of the kitchen as the storm outside finally began to pass. The first, faint light of dawn was beginning to touch the horizon. They had faced the monster, and they had won. The stillness in the aftermath was profound. They tied up Olive's stepfather with rope from the barn, his unconscious form a dark lump on the floor. Virgil, his face pale with pain, directed Olive on how to crudely splint his broken arm. Maeve, her earlier terror replaced by a quiet, fierce loyalty, brought them water and clean rags. As the sun rose properly, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Virgil looked at Olive. The madness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, weary clarity. "He'll wake up soon," he said. "We need to get the sheriff." "I'll go," Olive said immediately. "You can't ride with your arm like that." He looked at her, at the bruises forming on her neck, at the determined set of her jaw. He saw the woman who had faced down a monster to protect his sister, to protect him. He gave a slow nod. "The town is 5 miles east. Just follow the road. You can't miss it." She left him and Maeve with the rifle, and walked out of the shattered farmhouse door into the clean, rain-washed morning. She walked down the muddy path to the road. The same road she had stumbled along in utter despair just the day before. But she was not the same woman. The world had not changed. It was still hard and unforgiving. But she had changed. She had found a strength she never knew she possessed. She had faced the darkness, both in the world and in a troubled man's heart. And she had not broken. She returned hours later with the sheriff and his deputy. They took her stepfather away, a sullen, shackled prisoner. The sheriff took their statements, his pen scratching in a small notebook. He looked at Virgil's arm, at Olive's bruised throat, at the fierce, protective way Maeve now stuck to Olive's side. "Looks to me like you all saved each other," the sheriff said with a nod, before he left. In the quiet that followed, Olive found the deed to her family's farm, tucked away in her stepfather's saddlebags, just as she'd suspected. Her old life was hers again, if she wanted it. She stood on the porch of Virgil's farmhouse, the legal paper in her hand. She could leave. She could go back to her own home, live her own life. She was free. Virgil came to stand beside her, his arm in a proper sling. Maeve stood on her other side, holding her hand. "You can go," Virgil said softly. "You have your own place now. You don't have to stay here." His voice was full of a quiet, painful resignation. He expected her to leave. Everyone always left. Olive looked out at the fields, at the sturdy oak trees, at the smoke rising from the chimney. She thought of the cold, empty road. And she thought of the warmth inside this house. Not just the warmth of a fire, but the warmth of a shared struggle, of a bond forged in terror and survival. It was a broken home, run by a broken man. But in it, she had found her own unbroken strength. And she had found a family. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice clear and strong. She looked at Virgil, at his tired, hopeful eyes, and then at Maeve, who was beaming up at her. "My home is here now, with you." A life built on a foundation of fear and lies had been shattered, but in its place, they would build something new. Something real and strong, built not on rules and secrets, but on trust, courage, and a shared future. The storm had passed. The monster was gone, and for the first time, for all of them, the road ahead looked bright. This story is a powerful reminder that the greatest evil can sometimes be found where you least expect it. And the greatest strength can be found within yourself when you have something precious to protect. The journey from victim to survivor is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. If you were moved by Olive's story of courage and the unlikely family she forged in the face of darkness, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing you more tales of justice, survival, and the incredible power of hope in a world that often seems bleak. Hit that subscribe button, and you won't miss a single one.